And let me just say welcome, everybody, to Leadership and Engagement. It's a Matter of Trust. This is the newest series of trust conversations, and we'll tell you more about that as we proceed. And before we get underway with the introductions and the trust conversation, I'd like to share a certain quote with you. Perhaps you saw this on LinkedIn that we just shared the other day by Isaac Watts. Learning to trust is one of life's most difficult tasks. And he captures in that quote two things. One, it's something that we learn to do. We learn to trust. We enter into relationships and situations, and the process of trust is something that's gained. And it's also clear through that quote, and as we clearly know, it's not easy. All kinds of dynamics in our relationships, the way things go, the dynamic lives that we lead, both at work and in our personal lives. Trust is a foundational issue, and trust can be gained and lost and gained and lost again. So one of the things that we'll do during the course of this is try to provide both a combination of theories as well as leadership and communication strategies through a trust conversation. Fully, you're a part of this in every step of the way to see if we can better understand what it means to trust, the dynamics behind that, and along the way, making it a little bit easier for each of us. Let me start with an introduction by sharing with you a little bit about Yvette, Bethel, and Lorraine Fellows, who are panelists along with me. I'm Rick Cram, Plan to Be Your Best. Yvette, it's so good to have you here. You are an accomplished author. You are a trust specialist. You have an award-winning author record. You're a member and expert in the 6 seconds, emotional intelligence field, and many other qualifications. It's so good to have you here. How are you today?
Great to be here, Rick. And this, this is one of my favorite topics, so I'm excited to dive into the case studies.
Very good. I am too. Lorraine Fellows is a speaker, a facilitator, also a trust expert. She's experienced as an educational consultant, neurodiversity specialist, emotional intelligence as well. I've always been impressed with Lorraine because I always learn more from her, and I sense in her something that I think is wonderful. She's always seeking to grow herself. Lorraine, glad you're here.
Yes, thank you, Rick. I'm so glad to be here, and welcome everyone. We're looking forward to talking and sharing together about this really important topic.
Yes. And we're especially glad to have our special guest with us, Jim Sapp, who is in Indiana. I've known Jim for over 15 years now. He's the president of an award-winning, very fast-moving company, fast growth. It's a co-warehousing company called Rise Commercial District. And for a few years now, it's been one of the top 25 fastest growing companies in the Indianapolis, Indiana area. He founded and led this company, and from everything from the idea of the inception of it to having 10 locations and now serving, Jim, am I correct, over 1,100 different businesses that you're serving? That's a tremendous record. I remember the first time that I had the opportunity to meet you and work with you, I was especially impressed that you won the grand prize of the Business Book of the Year, and it was a book about starting your own business. So Jim is going to share with us in the course of our conversation a couple of stories about trust. And so we're especially glad to have you here, Jim, and we'll get to that in just a moment. Let me just introduce myself as well. I'll be the facilitator of today's trust conversation. I'm Rick Cram, Plan to Be Your Best. Now, you may see my brand as Plan to Be Your Best as you navigate pain. I help people who are experiencing any and all forms of pain, whether it's excessive stress, change exhaustion, or dealing with physical pain, such as I deal with day in and day out. But the same strategies, both leadership strategies and communication strategies that it takes to be resilient, living and thriving with chronic pain, are the very same leadership and communication strategies that I've used to help companies whether it's been a bank or a healthcare company, that have come to me and my team because they are in some form of pain. And one of the things I'll hope to inject in the course of this conversation are some of those resiliency strategies, how to deal with the new stressors and drive positive change through it all. So let me share with you 3 numbers as we get underway. And this is meant to sort of set the stage and taking a look at and appreciating what challenges we have in our lives, whether it's our personal lives or professional lives, that underestimate or rather underscore the importance of trust. Let me start with this number, 23%, less than a quarter. Today, only 23% of employees in the United States would strongly agree that they actually trust the leadership of their organization. That means at least half, more than half, have some level of distrust. There is a trust problem. If we looked at other dynamics of our society, whether it's government or even within families, there can be questions and numbers similar to that. Let me share this number with you. 36%. Only 36% of employees in the US are engaged with their employer. That means most of them are not engaged. The third number is this, and I think this is particularly striking and starts to get to the root of some of the challenges that we all have and why we can help people with matters of trust. It's 57%. 57% of the population say that they are so stressed they feel paralyzed. Now, if you've ever thought of a time when you feel paralyzed, what does that look like? It affects your relationships. It affects your productivity. It has a factor when it comes to your being able to communicate the way you want to. It's exhausting to feel paralyzed. So how does that take a hit when it comes to questions of trust? So Jim, let's take a look at a couple of the stories that I know that you're bringing with yourself today about trust. Let me first ask you this. In a fast-growing company, at some point, you get a sense that there are new needs for new roles in an organization. You must have a sense that there's an awful lot on your shoulders as the company grows and you're thinking about, what do I need to do next to help take the weight off my shoulders, but keep accelerating the growth?
Definitely. I think it's important to kind of look around you and say, are you keeping up with your duties and with your responsibilities? And are you looking forward? And where are you on that spectrum? And do you need help? And that's hard to give up, especially for a lot of entrepreneurs or a lot of small business owners. It's hard to give up the checkbook. It's hard to give up marketing or HR. So you have to kind of just take a deep breath and say, I need help if this company is going to continue to grow. So I'm going to tell you a little story. I did that about 2 years ago. I said, I just can't keep up. There's a lot of good things going on. Our facilities are full. We want to add more facilities. And what should I do? So I made a little schedule of what kind of characteristics I need to help me. And I looked at our current staff of about 20 and nobody had those. So I said, well, that's okay. I mean, they're all doing marketing or accounting or whatever. I need to find somebody that's more entrepreneurial and that will do a little bit of everything. My saying in one of the books I wrote was, if you own your own business, you can work part-time, whichever 12 hours a day you want. So I think a lot of you are in your own businesses and you know there's always one more job to do when you own your own business, whether it's all kinds of things. So I got a little frustrated and I went out on the internet and started looking for someone to become a COO, Chief Operating Officer. And I got some resumes in. and it just wasn't working out very well. It just wasn't, I guess I'm kind of picky too. So I needed something else. So I got frustrated and went on a bike ride. And in Indiana is very flat, and we have old railroads called rails to trails. So I jumped on the bike and went for a ride. And I never ever do this. And lo and behold, I came to a corner and I stopped and I ran into, not physically, but I started talking to somebody. And I said, well, let's go pedal. So we pedaled up this rail trail for 20 miles or so. And I kind of liked the guy. He was in construction. We build warehouses and then we lease them. So he had been building homes and small commercial buildings. So long story short, we started talking, and in about a month I interviewed him. He wasn't that interested. And I thought, well, you're a good fit. You're moral, you know about construction. So I offered him the job a couple of interviews later, and he turned me down. So that was a little, So I waited about 2 months and went back. I didn't give up because I thought he was my man. And I went back and hired him. So he did finally come aboard. I think he was nervous about, I don't know, the size. It was a new company. He didn't want that. So talking about trust, so I didn't know this gentleman at all, but I knew I had to delegate, and I knew I had to start trusting him to do responsibilities that I had been doing. The hardest thing was to give up or add him to our checking account, so that when I was gone and I have to travel a lot, there are things due and somebody needs to sign the check. So rather than just leaving a stamp at the office, I thought it's a little better to have somebody sign. So that was a big trust thing. And how I did that is I weekly or monthly asked him to do different responsibilities and gave him different duties to see if he would come through. And about on 99%, he came through. So the trust was built over time, and that took probably 1.5 years of delegating, asking him to do things, speak at different events or to different employee groups, and it came through. So I think it takes time, and Rick and I have talked about it. And you just, some of it's intuition, but some of it, I actually went out and gave tasks and didn't remind him, and then did that task get done in 2 or 3 weeks, and it always did. So my take on it is it's a slow growth behavior. And once you realize to do it, it helps the company grows. And I know when I'm out searching for new land or doing something, he can handle it.
Thank you for that, Jim. It's interesting to listen to, and as I do, I think of everything from that challenge to delegate, which I completely relate to. I think you're also raising questions. What qualities do we look for in other people in any professional relationship? You mentioned certainly that there are certain skills that you're looking for, but I honed in on the word moral. Let me just invite all of you to, if you'd like to either use the chat tool or if you want to raise your hand and make a contribution, what are the qualities that you look for in the beginning of let's make this a professional relationship, whether it's moral, skills-based, and so forth. Again, use the chat tool or raise your hand and if you'd like to contribute at this point. And then there's a second story, Jim.
Oh,
another story that goes.
I was gonna
go ahead, please.
Here's just a little thing I do. As Rick said, we're growing a lot. So usually on the final interview, I try to take somebody to a lunch, dinner, or breakfast. And it's interesting to find how they treat other people, whether it's the hostess or whether it's the waitress or waiter. And, you can tell, or at least I think I can, if they're rude and say, give me another coffee, or would you mind, I need a little more hot coffee. It kind of tells you about their personality. So I think I kind of call it a working interview, or, you just you're testing them, not with questions on morals. Of course, they're going to tell you they're very moral, they never steal, all that kind of stuff. So I think just being out in society and interacting has been helpful for me And I've realized that having a good leadership team at the company will keep the company growing.
Yeah.
So
Curious, Jim, how would you say through the course of your career, how have you changed? How have you grown in terms of your perspectives, your approach to hiring and to trusting people?
good, deep question, Rick.
Yeah.
Another, which this one is a little harder. I guess what we usually do is we say when you come on board with Rise, we say it's a 90-day test for both of us, for both the employee, so that they can test if they like us and if it's a good fit, and for us to see if their skill sets and how they work and their production or whatever they're doing. So that's one way. I didn't do that originally, and I found that the 90-day test is helpful for all. So I think I've become more patient, which is difficult for me, because I'm dedicated to the company, or I think I should do something. Everybody should, and that's not really so. So I think patience and looking at the big picture is real important.
Very good. Very good. Before we go on to story number 2, does anyone have any thoughts or questions they'd like to contribute? Thank you for what you're sharing in the chat tool.
I have a question, Jim. As I was hearing you, how you came up to this man and started writing with him, isn't there something about trusting yourself as well, especially the first time he turned you down? And you just said something like, I just knew he was my man, you know, like, do you want to speak to that?
Good question.
Sure, it is a good question. I think you're right. Is it Natty? Is that your name?
Yep, Nati, yep.
Natty. I think you do have some gut feeling, but I've been burnt on that before.
Yeah.
So I think the gut helps, or your general feeling that person has the traits. I think the traits and the morals are just as important as the skill set. The skill set, whether it's marketing or sales or accounting, but are they dedicated? Are they moral? That's much harder to find or determine, and your gut or your inner feelings. So how they treat other people was my example with a waitress or waiter. I think that tells a little bit about a person. Do they hold a door open for the ladies? Just kind of tells you a little bit about them. So gut is important. I don't use it totally, but I do use it, I don't know, 40, 50% probably.
Yeah. Good question, Nettie.
Thank you. Thank you.
How about the second story, Jim?
Sure. So as we continue to grow, we needed a marketing director, and this just happened actually this year. So we started interviewing, and we were pretty extensive. We did 3 interviews. We did a marketing test. We did a personality test, and we came down to 2 people, and we liked them both. And in the end, Joel, the guy I was just talking to, the guy I was just talking about, the COO, and I decided on this particular person. So we wait 2 or 3 weeks, and she starts, and I gave her my first little test, said, we have a new site opening up in Milwaukee, and we need to do a print mailing, and that was her background, print and print layout, and an email to all the businesses in the area, tell them about them. My particular business is kind of it's mid-size warehousing, short term, and we have a lot of amenities, but it's not in every state. We're kind of first to market. It's called co-warehousing, just like co-office, but we have co-warehousing. So we share things in the warehouse industry. It's real exciting stuff, like forklifts. But people appreciate that they don't have to have their own forklift or their own conference room. So we share things in our districts. So we hired this particular girl, and I said, okay, we're going to Milwaukee and we need to get some promotion out. And we have found that doing mailings, big postcard mailings and emails is beneficial. And she said, fine, no problem. She can handle that. I said, normally we try to get it out within 7 to 10 days. And I got busy and I kind of forgot about it. And I went back to her, and it had been about a month and it still wasn't out. So obviously my trust factor that she needs more, or it doesn't matter whether it's a he or she just needs more discussion about it. So we talked about it, and it was going to go out in the next couple of days. Took another 3 weeks. It wasn't that hard of a objective to accomplish. I'm not sure really what happened. So I did it a couple more times, and she finally said, I feel overwhelmed. I don't know much about digital marketing, but I'm going to learn it. So we went on for another month or two, and it didn't happen. So in the end, we made a amicable split. I was a little more assertive than she in leaving, but she's gone. And I think she's happier. It was the responsibility too. So yeah, the trust was learned, and when it's broken, then that's the toughest part in work anyway, that you have to make a decision. Can someone learn those skills, or is that a one-time off? I gave people 2 and 3 chances. So I guess once again, it's learned, and if it doesn't happen, then in my opinion, you need to make a pretty quick decision on change.
If I understand correctly, some of the backstory, she came from a larger company which had more
Yes.
structure, more built in, and she was interested in coming to your company because it would give her more authority. But with that authority also means more know-how, more entrepreneurial skills.
Yes, yes. And we were pretty open about the responsibilities and had them written out. So we felt that anybody would have known what to do and what we were going to expect. So, you know, I misjudged that, and it was difficult for everybody. But I think once the trust was broken, we've rehired now, and it's night and day. So it just wasn't a good fit.
Yeah. It raises a number of interesting questions. And again, use the chat tool or raise your hand if you'd like to make a contribution to this particular question. How hard is it when trust has been broken to be assertive in having a conversation about it on a scale of 1 to 10, say, or use your own description? How hard is it to be assertive in those kinds of conversations when trust has been broken? And is there anything more you'd like to add to that, Jim, before we actually have a bit of a panel discussion about it?
To answer your question, I think it's hard. It's like at 8 to bring it up to somebody, or a 9. So, but I think it's real important, especially in business, maybe different in education. But I think the earlier you call somebody out and say, this just isn't working, what happened here? The objective was to get this out in 10 days and it never happened. I think you have to tell people right up front what's going on and what the company needs. And I found the earlier you do that, the better.
Yes, yes. Good point. Good point. Yvette, let's start with you. What are your thoughts on both stories?
All righty. I think in Jim's first case, Jim, you obviously value competence, consistency, high quality, and other kinds of similar things to trust people, especially someone as important as a COO.
Right.
He also talks a lot about morals. And from my perspective, that means you expect a certain level of integrity in the work Now, we have a tool called the Trust Style Inventory that's based on Pillar of Trust theory. And trust styles are simply approaches to trust. And there are three categories: integrity, emotional mastery, and we disposition. On the surface, Jim, you're demonstrating an integrity trust style. And we always adapt. We use all the styles, and sometimes we support one style with other styles, but on the surface, it looks like you're using the integrity style with this process. And in order to trust the new hire has to demonstrate, the competencies that we mentioned. Now, in earning the trust, Jim, you use tests. And we all test in one way or another. Some actively use testing strategies like you do, and others just observe, or some combination of the two. Now, testing others can go either way. Some people don't respond well to being tested, and because they perceive it as a projection of distrust, and others welcome it. They're not, thwarted by it at all. They see it as an opportunity to grow or prove themselves. So it just depends on the person, their background, their worldview, those kinds of things. So when being tested, the person on the receiving end has to demonstrate alignment in their work and actions based on the criteria set by the tester, which is you, Jim. Now, this may be you were going to say something?
No.
Now, this may be perceived as pressure by the person being tested, so they may have to support their approach by their approach to earning trust with emotional intelligence. This is where now we're kind of stacking the skills. So even though they may love what they're doing and they're excited about the opportunity, they may not want to mess up. So it's all of that going on within themselves. How they perceive the test depends on the person. I think this case in itself worked out smoothly because the trust styles and the values, the competency levels, everything seemed compatible. And the competence was being consistently evidenced. I think everyone has different criteria for trust, and this case study just shows what Jim values, what you value, Jim, and how you go about building that trust. The second case is different. The antithesis happened. Now we've established, Jim, that what you value. And in the second case, you describe your distrust of the recruitment process when we spoke before this event. Because the recruitment process is a process where people are just selling themselves. They're not being themselves. They're just kind of projecting what they think you want to see. And because you're so aligned with the integrity trust style, Jim, your distrust in the process is also a challenge, because if you feel that there's some lack of integrity, not that someone's doing something untoward, it's just probably not aligned with what you need. If you don't trust the process that's bringing the people to you, and you alluded to it earlier when you spoke to, taking someone out for coffee, when you went on the trail and you were bike riding, the person was more comfortable. You were able to see who they truly are. So your gut feeling, because you mentioned sometimes your gut can be off, but your gut feeling in that more casual, relaxed environment can be more accurate. I think there's I don't think there's something called structural or systemic distrust. And so with regard to the actual distrust in the system, it causes you, as I said just a minute ago, not to be able to fully trust what the system produces. And from a solving perspective, it's important to take a look at any systems and structures that you have embedded in your organization that are not aligned with what you value, so that you can align it better and make less hiring errors over time. I think as we move on in the case, Jim, you said that you hired somebody to do some work, and you gave them this is one of the tests now. You gave them a timeline, and you seem to be a very straight talking person, so I'm sure they understood the urgency. Am I correct?
Yes, you're correct.
So the end result should have taken 2 weeks. It ended up taking almost 2 months. And when trust is broken at the beginning stages of a relationship, it's difficult or sometimes impossible to build a relationship as the foundation is undermined and the seed for lower expectations is planted. So now a seed is there in place, and it's starting to grow out. And in cases like this, what can happen is that the relationship becomes transactional. Now you're shifting. You have to use your power in ways that attempt to control the situation, because you need to protect the business, so that I guess the deficiencies can't negatively impact the organization. And one of the tools that we use in our work is called the spiral of trust. And this helps us to identify patterns based on how much trust you have in different people and in different situations. And taking a look at this situation with the second hire through the spiral of trust, you started out with distrust that was placed in the structure and the system around the recruitment process. And then once the person came in through a system that isn't fully trusted, so you're starting from a place that's, probably some trust, some distrust, or pure distrust. I'm not sure where you were, but it wasn't full trust. You assigned an important process and the person didn't deliver. So now your distrust is intensifying. At first, it may have been more targeted toward the system or the structure. Now it's being placed in the person. Now, you didn't say this in your conversation just now, but you did mention that this person took a group of people on a trip and couldn't justify why they did it. And I think that could have happened because of the cultural difference, where this might have been something that they did beforehand, and it was acceptable because they had the resources, and they didn't have the level of accountability and several other things that might have been different. I think overall trust is dynamic. It shifts depending on situations. In this case, it shifted downward because the situation, and I think Jim said earlier that, he tends to give people 2 or 3 chances. Like you don't pull the trigger quickly.
Right.
You give people a shot. And so with that shift, in this case, which I didn't know initially, you ended up terminating the relationship. And from my perspective, it's hard to salvage a relationship when trust up front is shot at this level. I think in larger organizations, this person probably, when she was interviewing, she probably thought it was easier to work in a small organization. They have no concept of the amount of hats you have to wear. I think they probably understand it intellectually, but they have no experience of it. And I think also within larger organizations, they have more division of labor. They have cultures that are more transactional than integrity-based, and they have more resources to address deficiencies. So if there's a deficiency, someone else can pull it together. In small organizations, that just isn't the case. So when hiring people at the top of the organization, you're also integrating the culture that they came from. And those cultural values and assumptions are now a part of your organization if you don't have something active, like an onboarding or orientation process that actively enculturates them. And when you don't, obviously, it seemed like it played out, which she was accustomed to, was actually from a larger organization that could kind of buffer it, where you didn't have that luxury. So that's my, thinking around it from HR, from a trust, from an engagement. Like, it's hard to connect with someone that's disconnected from what your organization really is at a cultural level.
I think that's very intuitive, and you had some good input and observations that'll be worth contemplating. So thank you.
You're welcome.
Thank you, Yvette. A question I'm thinking through is, with the wonderful combination of both theory, referencing the tools, and practical application, there are a variety of keywords such as integrity, we disposition, culture. Let me invite for each of you to add to the chat which words stood out, which concepts, or what was especially meaningful to you, whether it's one word or share a sentence or two, in terms of what stood out in terms of the theory or the practical application. So the challenges when you're onboarding someone new, whatever the process might be. Lorraine will share her thoughts. I'll share a few after mine, and then we'll open it up to general open conversation. Lorraine, please.
Thanks, Rick. Yeah, I just want to talk a little bit more about self-trust. Thank you, Nati, for the brilliant question about that, because self-trust is a choice that we make every day, several times a day. But most of the time, we're not aware of it because we do our best to choose the thoughts and behaviors which enable our lives to remain stable and predictable. And in the first case Jim talked about, he had to have complete trust in this person, this man who would do a lot of the responsibilities that he did, when he wasn't there. And it was really fortuitous that he met him when he was out cycling in nature, and they could just have a conversation without the pressure of, this is a job interview, because we've already mentioned the process of the company's recruitment wasn't, fully trusted by Jim. So one of our models of self-trust is called the 3 I's, and they stand for instinct, our inner voice, and intuition or insight. And we heard Jim talk about that gut feeling. So there was an instinctive knowing by Jim that this COO was most likely a good fit for the organization. And after he agreed to join, then he set out to know more, to build the trust about his unique mix of strengths, skills, strengths and weaknesses. And he employed these series of tests. And when you put your trust in someone that you don't know well enough, there's always a paradox. And the paradox is about the potential risks and the potential rewards of trusting that person. And for Jim, his gut feeling, his instinct, his intuition, and the recruitment process that was used weren't enough to build the trust that he needed in order to establish all the responsibility, put all that responsibility on the CEO that he needed to do. So he gave him these tests, found out more about the sort of person he was. And so when you are doing these tests, when he's doing these tests, he's actually finding out about the person's core values, their motivations, not just their competency, but is it consistent over time? And also their confidence level. You're learning about the person's boundaries. All of these things take time.
Yeah.
And just Yvette mentioned earlier that it's often not, some people don't prefer to be tested. So you can do it in a subtle way, you know, so it's not an obvious test, because you don't want to produce distrust, of course, in the relationship. And of course, Jim invested time to learn, to build that trust. And of course, that relationship was critical. The trust involved in that relationship was critical. And in the second case study, the recruitment process through the tests and the interview, you know, the original choice, was a different recruitment process. And because obviously in that situation, people tell you what they think you want to hear. And again, he wasn't sure, and his instincts were right, because when he did give the person the test with a specific time frame, a specific outcome, they didn't meet it. And then when the policies and procedures aren't aligned with what we believe, then that can cause issues there. So he was aware that the potential risks after a period of time outweighed the rewards. So he obviously took that chance with the new hire, and he gathered information to see that there were more risks than rewards. And as Yvette's already mentioned, the move from the larger company to the smaller company, the person wasn't a good fit. Because the cultural differences, you know, were such between the large company she was familiar with and Jim's smaller company was slowly coming into focus. He was more aware of those. Because the self-trust is an ongoing process, you know, and again, that takes time. And as the situation became clearer, Jim was obviously in a better position to make a balanced decision based on the facts, his experience, and his, you know, intuition. Because there's always a self-trust challenge when leaders are faced with not just hiring new people, but certainly when it's time to let someone go. Therein is another level of challenge for self-trust.
Mm-hmm.
Thank you, Lorraine, very much. Very insightful. As I listened to both you and Yvette, I think of two things. One, and let me invite each of you to add to the chat tool, and we'll open this up for conversation in just a moment. Which concepts, which thoughts stood out to you with what Lorraine was describing? And the one I'm particularly interested in for everyone is when you've experienced that you're being tested, how do you react to it? What might be one or two words, or perhaps on a scale of 1 to 10, 10 being, let's say, comfortable, 1 being uncomfortable. What's your reaction? Obviously, it's going to initially be an emotional reaction. How do you react when you know you're being tested? And let me share a couple of thoughts. This is where my mind goes. As I'm listening to you, Jim, and to Lorraine and Yvette, I think of the word intentionality. I gather from what you were describing, Jim, through the course of your career, you become more and more intentional in various ways as a leader, as a communicator. And then my mind goes to two aspects from the plan to be your best methodology. The plan and best are acronyms of 8 strategies and a set of skills for them. The L in plan stands for listen. And I hear you, and I'm hearing that we're all here listening very intensely, and listening in 2 ways. One, we're listening to our inner conversation. about how we're reacting to it, as well as listening to Jim, Yvette, and Lorraine. And one particular concept I'd like to just float for the sake of thinking it through is this: the person who does the most listening is in the most control. And by that, I mean, you're in control of your emotional state, your mental state, you're listening to yourself, and you're in control of listening to discern and with objectivity to what someone else is saying. One of the things that I find fascinating when we practice, or if I train people in active listening, is that two particular things. The more I demonstrate that I'm listening to somebody, and the more someone is listening to someone else, the more likely that other person that you're listening to is going to open up and share even more. And the more they share, that gives you more to use in the course of building a trust-based relationship. One of which is to listen to evidence of what their personality type is, and then how to use that to speak their language. If someone is a very process-oriented person, for example, if you're hearing them talking about how things are going to get done, then you can use words to describe and connect with them and build a trust-based relationship by talking about process, the steps that we'll take to do this. If someone you're hearing is listening to is talking about what the social experience is going to be, the more you can relate to that person and talk about what the experience will be to work together on a particular project. So again, the more we listen, the person who does the most listening, and listening well, listening actively to themselves and to others, the person who listens the most is in the most control. Secondly, let me tap into the BOLD strategy, the plan best 8 steps, 8 strategies, or 8 states, if you will. It's almost fair to describe we're always in a state of listening to ourselves and to others. The B stands for BOLD. And there's a wonderful quote. I'm trying to remember the name of the person, but he makes the point in this quote that boldness has genius and magic in it. And what he's really referring to, and where I go with being bold, is being assertive. You know, on one hand, the word assertive, actually, I can nerd out on words, being a communications guy. The word assertive came into our language in about the 1500s. At the same time, 2 other words were entering our language. One was aggressive, and the other passive. Aggressive actually first meant in our language was to start a fight. Passive meant to hold back. And we all know the phrase, there's passive aggressiveness, there's passive, being so passive where you're the one who suffers it. But right in the middle is this assertiveness. And part of being assertive means that you respect yourself, what's important to you, what you need to communicate. You respect what needs to be communicated as well as you respect yourself. The third component of that is that you respect the other person enough so that whatever you need to communicate, you'll give them the respect to let them react to it emotionally or however behaviorally that they feel compelled to do. And therein lies an opportunity to think through how to have those tough conversations when trust is broken. I liked your point, Jim, that the sooner you have that conversation, the better. There's a particular model, and I think you might be familiar with this, that having a conversation based on that assertiveness and that trust, where we use, to Yvette's point, the we disposition. I'm seeing this in this particular behavior, or I see this project didn't get done. Then we're thinking in terms of we. This is how I see it. This is what I believe needs to change. The behavior needs to change in this particular example. And then you enter in something that I draw from the communication strategies, and that is consequences, to describe the positive consequences that will take place when positive change happens, as well as even articulating the negative consequences if something doesn't get done. To set the stage for how things will likely go, but it all in the hopes that positive change will be developed and take place and trust is restored. So, and then so if we set the stage by describing it with I statements and we statements, this is what I'm seeing as a challenge. This is how I view it, my perspective is, this is what I see needs to change, and then describe consequences. And done it in that assertive way is one of the best possible ways of having those difficult conversations. So I'll actually pause here, and now let's take the next step in this trust conversation in terms of opening it up to what we've all been talking about here. And please do unmute yourself as you'd like to, but share with us what might be some of your initial questions or thoughts on all that we've shared so far. We're a small enough group so that you can just go ahead and speak right up.
Kind of a quiet group, huh?
And actually, Lorraine or Yvette, is there anything that you'd want to comment on what each of us have served up in this panel discussion?
I think trust is often overlooked by organizations because it can be messy, it can be difficult, it can be uncomfortable. But once there's a relationship involved, there's always trust involved. And so the more, the more we kind of get the word out that, let's solve some of these challenges at that trust level, the better off the organizations can be, because it makes it easier, it's healthier, it's engagement is more possible, it's just much easier than having to kind of work around and circumnavigate people and situations. So it's a best kept secret.
That's a good way to put it. Good way to put it.
Yeah, and I was thinking about the role of assumptions. It's like the more we trust ourselves, the less we have to lean on assumptions, because assumptions are very thin supports, really, and are easily fall over. And I'm not saying there were specific assumptions made in this case, but it's made me think of when I rely on assumptions and how it's better to have the information, the communication, the trust, the self-trust and the trust in the relationship, where you don't need to rely on assumptions because they're not very supportive.
Yeah. Well, they can be. It depends. It depends on whether the assumptions are uplifting or if they kind of cause separation. Because some assumptions are helpful.
Yeah.
I think also is from what you're saying, that ability to reach a point where hopefully we can learn to speak the same language.
Yeah.
I really appreciate that from Jim's stories, from the perspective of the owner of the business who has a higher level of goals, insights, future vision. And you're hoping to bring in people sometimes who are really entrepreneurial, who see that. One of the things I really appreciate from expanding my small team, I gave someone Yvette's TSI, and I learned out of the beneficial outcomes. I was hoping to hire somebody entrepreneurial who could kind of take charge. And I learned in the beneficial outcomes, decision-making, what came back as lowest. And it's interesting, we ended up having a conversation about it. And I was a little surprised because as a parent, with, 3 children, an empty nester. And I really was surprised about the decision-making part in the process of having a discussion. She helped me understand that she works remotely with all of her clients without having a true understanding of what our goals are. It led to like, I was like, okay, let's go full stop. Let's slow down. So now in every project, we really talk about what my why is behind the project and whether it's time sensitive or not. So that way it'll help her make a decision about how she processes it, what suggestions she makes. And I learned in the process, we're building all these systems. And in the process, I need to fill in comments wherever possible. What I'm noticing is I put a comment, she's answering a comment with a highlight, making sure I hear her insights. It's really helping us build a relationship in a different sense. We're actually communicating across the documents, and then then we're setting up times to do a check-in. But if that process of really trying to share the language part, I took a lot of notes on that, because I think that's really sometimes our starting point. Our cultures are different, our backgrounds, our experience, our needs, our goals, and in some cases, the people who work with us or even collaborate with us, they don't know what our future plans are. And really, that's the part I really appreciated her. So we had a discussion. I was like, hey, here's some things I'm thinking about for the next year. And it's changing how we work together. And I never gave somebody that deep a view, but now I'm doing it with another team member, because you're letting me know what it is that you need to be more successful. So
think-
really, thank you so much for this.
Thank you,
I
Melanie.
think, can I just interject? There are two ways that people go about recruiting, or two kinds of criteria. One is they may be looking for someone who can hit the ground running. And in that case, the fit is more important, because some assumptions or needs, some basic needs or skill sets need to be in place for the person. In other organizations, there could be an expectation, okay, I'm not really going to find someone that's an exact fit. I have the time, the way the company is being run can accommodate additional time to develop this person. Yes, I'll do that. I think each organization is different. Your organization can accommodate it. It sounded like Jim's organization started to expand really quickly. So we have to keep in mind that everything doesn't apply to everyone. It's situational. And Jim's need was to find someone who intuited, who had the right morals, who had built integrity, his morals, and had the competency. So he didn't have as much time to break it down because of the situation. He had to be, I think, Jim, you spoke about, having to go out and do certain things, and you needed to be able to trust the person that was left behind. So not in every case is that possible, especially in smaller organizations. But when you have the space to develop, and really you have to, because you can't find the skill set, that's also appropriate. I think both work depending on the organization and the context.
One observation, and thank you, Melanie, for all of that. And Madalena, you touched on some aspect of this too in your comment, that there are, let's see, Lorraine, what was the word that you used when you last spoke? There was a certain one particular
Yes.
word.
Assumptions.
Assumptions.
Yeah.
There are assumptions and there are expectations.
Mhm.
And when expectations aren't met, that's going to spark frustration.
Yeah.
Which can affect the relationship, can affect how we communicate, both how we give communication and receive it.
I think to close that gap in the recruitment process, what some organizations do is they have a process in place that really starts to define the fit for the person. So it's not just about, oh, they have this qualification and they did this for this company. It's more about, what are the competencies and the behaviors that they're bringing that will impact us, and can we afford to have those behaviors kind of, open up here, or will it serve us? So depending on this, there's a myriad of tools out there, including the trust tools that we do use, but certainly understanding from some psychometrics can give some really deep insight into how people will interact with the people around them.
There's a quote by a motivational speaker, his name is Tony Gaskins. And the quote is this: trust the process. Just do the work and the results will handle themselves. But hasn't this discussion basically been about, certainly there's processes in place, but things don't always work out. And therefore, the need to be more intentional, the need to do that listening, the need to be very thoughtful about the process and so forth.
Yeah, and there are many ways to do that. I mean, fit and assessments, that's one way. I think Jim talked about another way with, going to coffee and making it more informal than anything. Some organizations have a team, meet the person and get multiple perspectives. I mean, there are many ways you can break it down so that you can get people comfortable enough so they're not just feeding you kind of a routine answer.
We're going to continue talking here, but Jim, let me, out of respect for your time, I know you're very busy and on a mission. How are you doing time-wise?
I probably need to exit. I have somebody waiting. So I really found this interesting, and I wish you all well, and thank you for inviting me.
Jim,
Thank
thank
you
you so much for being
Thank
here.
you too,
very
Jim.
much.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Jim. Bye.
So where is your mind going with this? Madalena, if you want to unmute and chime in, curious to know your thoughts. Some of your comments have been very helpful.
I just wanted to say first, thank you, Rick, that I noticed that Jim was quite, he was very present, but he was meditating, and I wanted to just give him a shout out because probably he's going to see the recording, that I do appreciate his effort and time and trying to process all the information, because he seemed very tired, poor guy. So kudos for him for just wanting to be present of this part of this trust conversation. I also wrote in the chat some insights based on what Yvette and Lorraine said. You also asked something about, whether we were part of recruitment processes where we are tested, Rick, and how did that make us feel? I was there. I actually was in a recruitment process that I stood an hour, guys, an hour to just do eyes and dots and stuff on a booklet like this thick.
Wow.
And I didn't feel uncomfortable at all. I thought maybe, okay, if you guys are doing the test with me, you're probably wanting to see that I'm not, or I know what I'm doing, or it was for the L&D department. But what struck me in terms of the recruitment and how they did it was that they did communicate the results. I mean, to put me through a test for an hour and then at least, do me the courtesy of sharing the results so that at least I know, like, how am I based on your so-called internal standards, because that kind of also inflicts and impacts the trust that I'll have as a probably future potential applicant to other jobs, and how the image of the company and the department as well, is affected. And that goes into the comment I made in the chat about the working definitions of the employer-employee working relationships after you go through the recruitment, right? Because I think you start a relationship through in recruitment with the so-called with the company, because you're starting to build in your head some image of it or of the department. And then when you get into there, like the lady in the second case, where she said that at some point she felt overwhelmed with the digital marketing, probably that's something that, that realization of being overwhelmed comes with the actual job doing. probably does in some situations doesn't have anything to do with the job description, unfortunately. But that happens in recruitment. That's done superficially, unfortunately. And I'm saying this because I've been there. And sometimes those that have to pay the price, in inverted commas, metaphorically speaking, are both the employer and the employee, right? Because the employee will need to, when she realized she wasn't a good fit, she ended up being holding herself accountable and left. But then also, if probably the so-called definition of what acknowledgement and accountability means in that team, in terms of, okay, you missed a deadline, that's, let's say, okay, we can work with it. But if you miss it the second time and you miss it the third time, then that's a pattern. Then that's something that's, something is not right there. So in that sense, I would totally say that, it has to do with what Yvette said about trust building from the get-go and the starting point of the working relationship, when you find yourself as a team leader with a new member, but also with what Lorraine said, in my mind, with, the trusting your intuition and the self-trust. Because probably in terms of the lady that left in the second case, it was a matter of self-trust, because she finally reached that point where she couldn't take anymore. And then she just had to kind of, okay, I would say stand up for herself, but, take attitude and do something, take action. Because you cannot just stay in a situation where, you constantly see you can't do your job, and you constantly see that, the more overwhelming comes from pressure that the employer puts on you, but also the pressure that you put on yourself. Because she thought she could do it, but she couldn't do it. And sometimes that's even nastier to acknowledge, because it makes you vulnerable and then that means that you have to, like you said, Rick, you have to become assertive with yourself and kind of look yourself in the mirror and say, okay, that's it. I'm here. I'm realizing this. Like, I have to take attitude now. And sometimes self-trust plays out not in a good way in these moments. Sometimes it plays out good. Sometimes it plays out not so good. But I used to deliver a training that was called Taking Charge, and I would tell people, don't expect the team leader to tell you what to do if you're reaching a point where you're feeling frustrated and stressed about your job, because the team leader is not going to tell you quit. Never, because the team leader doesn't want that. The manager, And also it depends, this ties into the culture element as well. And I saw Melanie put a comment about this, the culture challenges. And sometimes what I've noticed, and this is what I noticed when I did the TSI certification with Yvette, was that organizational culture at the organizational level was not in sync with the culture at the team level. And it was not in sync with other teams in the organization. And also, with for instance, what was the definition of culture and the way we did things in the training department. So the training department, the HR department, admin staff, and the operational teams, they all had their own definition of, working definition of culture. And that impacts a lot of the elements that we touched upon.
Silos.
So thank you. That's my 2 cents on it.
Thank you. Let me share another quote. This is kind of, let's see how relevant this is. Trust is harder for leaders. They're in a tough spot. They need to have answers. This came up in a conversation I had with a group of leaders a few weeks ago. And this fellow owns a number of businesses. He said, and comes from a technology background. Trust is harder for leaders. They're in a tough spot. They need to have answers. And there's when their answers aren't there, or a process to get the answers, the stress level ratchets up.
I think too, instead of they need to have answers, they probably need to have questions too. I think powerful questions, when you don't have an answer, can bring the answer out. It doesn't have to come from the leader. So there's a level of self-trust where you should be confident enough to really start asking questions so that you can allow the collective intelligence to bring it forward. Because if you feel you always have to have the answer, that's going to be problematic when you don't.
Right, right. It's interesting. Here's something I've observed over the past several
Okay.
years, that a year or so, not even before a year was into COVID, there was the beginning of a wave of messages in LinkedIn, business publications and so forth, to leaders: don't go it alone. You don't need to go it alone.
Right, right.
And as consultants, one of the things that we specialize in is having questions, the right questions, that are the open-ended questions to a great extent, which help guide us all to those answers. But it's almost as if that wave of messages to leaders has waned over the past couple of years.
I think in the context, because a lot of leaders are being rewarded for individual behavior, they don't see themselves as a part of a larger ecosystem, where the ecosystem, if they can see it clearly, they won't go it alone, because they'll know that there's structures and systems and people and relationships that are important, that are there to support them. But unfortunately, a lot of organizations contradict that with the way people are rewarded or expected to behave through how leaders lead, or how, performance management is run, or whatever. So I think it's important for leaders to start to see members of the team as extensions of themselves, and not see themselves as separate. I think that's where the trust comes into play with them, because it starts to act as a binding factor that actually brings people together, instead of just giving lip service to working as a team.
Mm-hmm. And that's where the progress is made, isn't it? When people are, I like to say that the people who plan together grow together. And when there is that growth, which teams need, organizations need. And well, that's the goodness that comes from addressing these issues like trust.
Mm-hmm.
Growth in those relationships, which has so many benefits for each individual, for the team, and for the organization.
I mean, the trouble with trust is you can't guarantee that if you put some effort into it that it'll happen, because both parties to the relationship need to work toward it. Mm-hmm. And they may have different criteria, so even though it's not guaranteed, it doesn't mean that you shouldn't do it. I'm just saying, be reasonable with your expectations, because imposing trust actually causes distrust. You can't create an imposition like you better trust this person so you could get the work done. That just doesn't happen that way. People choose who they want to trust, whether it's work related or not.
I think this has to do with what you say, Yvette, about trust, willingness, and trustworthiness as well.
Yeah.
Sometimes people are not willing to ask the questions. And if, let's say, by some miracle, they are willing to ask the questions, then they're not willing to hear the answers.
That's it. It's painful.
Exactly. And sometimes, that also ties, it's like an infinity signal, the trustworthiness and trustworthiness. That's how I see it. Because it's like, and also I wanted to say about the bandwidth that ties into the willingness of asking questions. Sometimes managers in IT, and I'm saying this because I worked in IT companies, and I've seen how, the pressure that they have to handle, not necessarily from their teams, but the pressures that they have to handle from their clients and the higher management, and the bureaucracy that sometimes surrounds them. And I think, not always, but I think if they're not becoming more aware of the willingness to build trust in their teams or with the managers beneath them, or their peers and so on, this needs to come from a deeper place in you, I think, to be trust willing, to be willing to start the trust building. Because if it doesn't come from a deeper place, then it cannot, I don't think it can be triggered in any way, or I don't know if it makes sense what I'm saying, but I've seen this with people that, and quite young people, not like you, with life with years of life. I've seen this with people. I'm saying this as a compliment. So I've seen people young, like 25 or 30, between 28 and 32 years of age, that they had a lot of people that they had to, the teams, because the organizational chart was built this way, and they were very young and they felt overwhelmed, right? Because they didn't know, they didn't have that life skill, or not even the life wisdom, to kind of try to find it in themselves on how to, find those resources to keep moving. Because they were jumping from one extreme to another, and sometimes they would go into training. They were sent to leadership training, and I would have to tell them some.
I think one of the baseline things that people need to consider when building trust is forgiveness.
Yeah, totally agree with it.
I just had this conversation this week with a client, and I said, can you forgive the employee for what they did? Can you say it? And they couldn't. They could not. And as basic as that sounds, that's a building block for something that that tears apart the organization. That unforgiveness is divisive. So even though it may sound touchy-feely and all that stuff, that actually is very destructive.
I see what Yvette said in the comment. The line manager training should be mandatory for any manager, team leader. Yeah, and then maybe they should put in that line manager training aspects like trust and assertiveness in the real sense, not just slides, pretty slides with infographics. And because usually, in the companies I worked in, they have this line manager training, Yvette, but it's not. They have the what so-called onboarding, or they do the so-called leadership programs and everything, but
the flashy vision and values,
and they don't go into the
the tough stuff.
Exactly. They just like to it's like working with the cement. It just but it doesn't go into those kind of details.
I think it's hard because at that stage they're still trying to attract the person and show them that they made the right decision. So it's still like sales mode with orientation and onboarding. And unfortunately, because of that, what Yvette is pointing to is, there's a deficit because they're still selling.
That's right. And it just, can I just say that it just highlights the vital importance of having these trust conversations, talking about trust, using the tools and the real life situations where trust is so crucial, and seeing what it feels like, sounds like, because otherwise we address, or the only time, in my recent career in working in a school, it was when trust was broken, when there was distrust. That was talked about, but we didn't talk about what it meant to trust, what that looked like, what that sounded like, how our core values, what the values which were on the website, and people said were really important to us, how was that actually not being translated into real life action, which resulted in a lack of trust. And I know that, in employee situations, it can cause a lot of distrust. So if we can be intentional, love that word, Rick, you mentioned earlier, if we can be intentional and proactive, you know, about what really is trust and how does it play out, and how can we can become more skillful, you know, with trust. That is the antidote to a lot of either employee turnover, employee stress, dissatisfaction, and good people being lost, you know, from positions where they should be thriving.
That's right.
Mhm. What a wonderful addition to what Yvette Jordan had just added to the chat regarding the power of what role playing does. In role playing, they get to not only just experience it, but to your point, Lorraine, they get to feel it. And there's a positive emotional experience attached to it. That's what makes it stick. That's what makes it something that they'll seek to repeat again and again and grow from there. Now, Yvette, you mentioned ecosystem. And we've got time, unless someone else has a certain point they'd like to share. There's a quote I'd love to share, and then some information, some things to think about regarding the ecosystem of trust conversations that we're all passionate about. Does anyone have anything else at all that you'd like to share? Let me share my screen, see if this works well. Just briefly, to take a look at this quote. And it touches on what some of you were just saying, by Albert Einstein. The world as we have created it is a process of our thinking. It cannot be changed without changing our thinking.
He said something similar to this, where you can't change a problem with the same level of consciousness that created it.
Yes, very, very true.
Yeah.
So true. So this is, and we can, changing our thinking is so integrated with our emotions, changing how we feel, and that will change behavior. And here's, as we're seeking to create an ecosystem of trust conversations, you've had this chance to get a taste of and experience a trust conversation. And it's part of how we're elevating and trust and taking a look at the ways we lead and engage, whether it's our teammates, the people who we report to, whatever community that we're involved with, or even within families. The IFB Academy has on the calendar courses set up, and here are a few of them. Yvette, do you want to elaborate on this?
All right. Thank you, Rick. On May 7th, we start, well, it's
That was
gone
yesterday.
now. Yeah. So I'll skip to June the 5th. The Trust Style Inventory Certification, that is for coaches, consultants, HR managers, trainers who can use the Trust Style Inventory, which helps people within the organizations to understand what styles are being used and to help them to start adapting their style so that trust levels can start to shift. The next course is June the 18th. That's the Trusted Leader Certification. And we go into the pillar of trust, the same as with the Trust Style Inventory Certification. But this focuses more on leadership and, you know, really helping you to shift how you lead in the context of building trust and creating safe space. Understanding culture, all those kinds of topics are included. And finally, Say Yes to Me. Lorraine talked about self-trust. That's on July the 16th. That is all about creating breakthroughs in your life and career through self-trust, improving your confidence levels. So we would love to have you join us. And you can check us out at https organizationalsoul.learnworlds.com if you're interested, or just pop me a note, info@orgsoul.com. Thank you.
Well, thank you, Yvette, very much. Lorraine, what do you have that you're looking forward to?
Yeah, we're looking forward to using more of the trust tools and the courses in my work. I'm going to be starting work with families and taking that into education. So I'm really looking forward to that. So do get in touch if you're interested in that.
Very good. A lot to look forward to. Likewise, there's the next trust conversation next Wednesday, the 15th, that will look at the same issues, but from the perspective of teams. Hope you join us for that. Also, one of the focus with what I'm going to be doing more and more of in the future is taking a look at trust and having trust conversations surrounding being more resilient in the face of whatever is overwhelming, whether it's like what I experience, daily chronic pain after surgery number 7 on my left knee has left it in a state of trauma. When we're overwhelmed, whether it's stress, chronic pain, anything that is, whether it's exhaustion, whatever it might be, their trust takes a hit. We don't trust ourselves. We even have everything from identity problems, and therein lies challenges when it comes to trust, to not trusting yourself with what's going to work next to strengthen those parts of me or you that build your own internal resilience, how you think through and lead and feel through how to be resilient in the face of whatever is overwhelming. So we'll be sharing all of this with you in the weeks and months ahead, and look forward to seeing you again and being a part of it. All with a goal to help you in your life and your work as much as we can. Any final comments, Yvette and Lorraine?
It was a
Thank you.
pleasure. Yeah, it was a
Yeah.
pleasure. Thank you very much. And we look forward to the next one, and the next one,
Yes.
and the next one.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Yvette, Madalena, and Melanie, thank you so much for being here and for helping to contribute as you did to make this a really rich conversation. Thank you.
Yes, thank you all.
Yeah. Thank you.
Oh,
Bye.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye.
Take care. Bye-bye.
bye-bye now.
Bye.